Hi guys, and welcome to the next video in the Unit 14 IT Service Delivery series. In this video I'm going to be looking at task 3, where we're going to look at the IT Service Delivery solution. So as you can see from the activity itself, we're asked to produce some form of delivery solution that meets the current and future needs of Southern Gaming Marathon events and its users. We've been asked to include information on the information requirements, the data requirements, hardware and software service options, managing infrastructure and its users. It does state that our evidence may contain a combination of written, tabular, and annotated diagrammatic information that may consist of more than one document. So there's no single preferred method of presenting this evidence. So when you get into your exam, don't worry if you come out and talk to your colleagues inside of your class and say that you drew it in a specific way. There is no necessary one way is the only way to do that in this question. As you can see from the marks itself, there is an opportunity to gain 20 marks here. So the previous two questions were 8 marks each. So this is a really good opportunity to bolster up your grades and your marks that you're collecting throughout your exam. So if we move on to the next page inside of our presentation, so what I'm showing you here is a diagram of a suggested solution for this scenario. You can see that I've given 3 specific areas using squircles to define these individual areas. When you come to doing your exam, you should look very carefully at what the scenario is suggesting in terms of locations of specific headquarters and any satellite sites. What you're going to need to do, like I've done in this example here, is create these circles to show these individual entities separate from each other. You can see again from this example I've used lines to connect them via the internet so that they can still communicate via specific technology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this diagram and this scenario and give you an indicator as to the sorts of things that you might want to consider inside your scenarios. So the first one that we're going to look at is actually our headquarters. When you do your exam, you're going to find that you're going to have a central location where you may have server requirements so that your local site, be it the head office, or any remote sites, be it another workshop or another shop itself, can communicate back to the mothership, if you wish, or the headquarters, and gain access to servers and services that are provided by them. In this example, you can see here in this diagram, I've got a central switch. This central switch I'm suggesting is a 24-port power over Ethernet switch. This technology will allow, using power over Ethernet, us to connect wireless access points that don't have a plug attached to them. Essentially, we're using the Ethernet cable to provide not only data, but we're going to use it to provide power to the device itself. This could be good in situations where you might be in a factory, for example, and you have a wireless access point available to your colleagues inside of your organization. But when you go further down the actual factory itself, there aren't any Wi-Fi repeaters or anything like that, and there's no power sources. What we can do is we can run an Ethernet cable using the power over Ethernet switch to provide the power to a wireless access point that could be 50 meters away to provide not only the power and the Ethernet, but allow people further down the factory to connect to our services and our backbone. As you can see from the diagram, we've got a connection from the switch to servers. Now here you can see I've put 3 pictures of 3 different servers, and these servers could run specific purposes and services. So you can see here that we've got the server that deals with web serving, print serving, mail serving, and then potentially a ticket sales for this scenario. What we can look at is using single servers. This could be more efficient for any company. Historically, we used to have one server that ran one service. Now we can use what's known as virtualization and using virtual machines. So we can have quite a medium-end computer that has its resources shared over virtual machines, allowing us for more efficiency and effectiveness as well. What we can also do in these server rooms is provide what's known as a UPS, or an uninterruptible power supply. These devices are quite good because they protect the systems from things like power surges and power outages. If we have a power outage and a server is doing an operation, there is potential there for corruption to happen. So having these UPSs in place can protect the systems quite well. The next element that's connected to our switch is something like a desktop PC. These are your users' PCs. So here we might want to stipulate inside of our submission for the exam something like the specification that we're going to be suggesting for the organization. Here you can see I've suggested an i5 computer that's running 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it has a 250 gigabyte solid state drive. Solid state drives are better than a traditional hard disk drive as they don't have any moving mechanisms inside them. They're not classed as a mechanical drive. They're essentially a USB thumb drive on steroids. We're also going to suggest that we have a 19-inch standard monitor for the users, along with a mouse and keyboard. It's very important that you do not forget these peripheral devices because they are actually quite key to any service delivery that we're going to be doing. Again, you can see here I've suggested an operating system, something like Windows 11 for this operation. Something you might want to consider in some of your questions and your justifications in maybe question 4 or 5 is looking at why we're offering certain software. So it could be that we're offering Windows 11 because it's supported quite well. We could offer alternative solutions, maybe something like Linux, and using software that doesn't carry a cost when it's used. In this instance, we're also going to provide Office applications for things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint. We can, again, like the operating system, offer free alternative solutions if it's a small company, or if it's a larger company, we might say that they're covered under their site license, so they can therefore have all of these installed on all of the PCs that they have in all the organization. And finally, we want to make sure that we've stipulated that we're going to have an antivirus. It's important to protect these individual devices on the network from potential infiltration using worms, viruses, or any other malicious means. Here you can see I've also connected a hardwired connection to laptops, and these laptops can follow the same sort of desktop specification so that we're keeping continuity for our services and our clients inside of our organization. Here in this scenario, you can see that I've offered a network printer attached to the switch itself. This would allow us to allow our users inside the organization to send a print job to the server, and then for them to move around the company organization and move to a printer using a card to tap onto the printer, and then the web server will release the job to the network printer. The print server itself carries a really good operation. Some printers don't have much storage space on them. They might have only 32 megabytes. Now, if you think inside of an organization, they might send or have another number of people sending a job to the printer, quite quickly the hard drive will be quite full. So what we use is the print server to store it temporarily until the person gets to the printer, where when they tap on their card, it releases the job straight to that printer. As you can see from the diagram, I've also stipulated that we're going to run category 7 Ethernet cable around our organization. It's important that when you do your exam that you're going to need to identify what sort of cabling you're going to be using. We've also identified that we're going to have a firewall here. This could be a hardware firewall or it could be a software firewall, and that's down to your individual scenarios. We also have a router which allows us to route our traffic through into the internet, and we're also going to transfer that through a virtual private network or a VPN. The benefit of a user or a company to use a VPN is that our data traffic that's been sent out over the internet is encrypted. This encryption doesn't fully eradicate any potential hacking or interception of any of the traffic going out of our organization, but it should reduce it. So this is our headquarters. Now you can see when we move on, we're going to go into our next organization area, or next office if you wish. And in this instance, this is our gaming arena. So our gaming arena is where we're going to be having, in our scenario, our patrons and our guests coming to watch people play a game. So as you can see in this one, we're going to be having people potentially on a game stage using computers to play around and to stream via the internet and to entertain our patrons. So we're going to need to change our view on what hardware we're going to need here. Here you can see we've got an Intel i9 with liquid cooling. Now this is that we're going for the high-end PC here. We want to make sure that our users on the stage are going to have the best possible equipment so that they can play their games and entertain the people that are watching them. So we've gone for higher specs of everything. So we've used the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro 64GB sticks of RAM in this build suggestion. We're also supplying and providing a Samsung 980 Pro 1TB NVMe solid-state drive. These are very high quality hard drives that have high and fast read speeds and write speeds to the hard drive itself. We're also going to suggest the very best graphics card we can, so we're going to be looking at something like the Asus ROG Strix GeForce RTX 4090 OC edition. That should allow the person that's playing on this computer to be able to have the best experience in terms of graphical output. Along with this, we're going to provide them with the best monitor available, something with a high refresh rate so that there is no tearing. So we're going to be looking at something like the Corsair Xenon 32-inch IPS UHD 4K screen. And bundled along with this, like we did in our headquarters, we're going to be using something like a Corsair K60 TKL Pro keyboard and a Corsair Sabre Pro gaming mouse. Now, Corsair were very kind to send out to me these devices, and I have to say that they're fantastic. When using them, they're very tangible, and the sensitivity of the mouse allows for great response times when you're playing games. The tactile element of the keyboard really allows for that immersive experience when playing a game as well. So these pieces of hardware will be fantastic for the people inside of our games arena whilst they're playing the game to really experience the fullest that they can out of the systems they've got. Again, like we did in the previous example, we're going to have software installed on these machines. So we're going to be looking at having an operating system of something like Windows 11. We could also suggest here that this is going to be Windows 11 Pro, so we've got a bit more control over some of the facilities and abilities of these systems. We want to make sure that they've got antivirus because these are going to be connecting to the internet so that they can play over the internet or even over the LAN. And we're going to have a variety of games installed on these machines because this games arena, this games event is going to be happening. There might be different games running, so we're going to need to make sure that those games are installed on the machines. As well as that, we might want to make sure that there's anti-cheat software so that it's a fair game. We're going to be running these machines over a 24 10 gigabit switch. That will allow the data and the traffic to communicate around the little intranet that we've got really quickly, really well, and also make sure that there's zero lag when the game players are actually in some sort of competitive competition. As you can see here, we've also got another server attached. Now this server is going to allow us to have some sort of local caching of anything like updates or any game improvements that might have been released by the developers themselves. So rather than having, if we've had 6 machines or even 12 machines for different teams out there running this specification, and all of those machines needed to update their game for, say for example, Fortnite or Overwatch or Valorant or Rocket League, they can, rather than go individually out on the internet using up our bandwidth, go to the caching server and download the updates that are available. From the switch again, we've got a local area network that's open up to our patrons, and we're going to use again a Power over Ethernet wireless access point to allow our patrons to connect their mobile devices, laptops, and possibly tablets. This could be to do with the press that are looking at this event, and they might want to write some blogs, or they might want to do a stream of the competitors in the arena. So they're going to need to have some sort of access point that they connect to in terms of our Wi-Fi. All of this is going through our firewall, so we've got a bit of control as to what's going in and out, but it's going to also go through our router, and you might notice that we don't have a VPN installed here. Now the VPN could be a potential bottleneck for us because we're going to have lots of devices going out over the internet, so we're not going to do that on this instance here. The internet is there for, obviously, our users to be able to get onto any of the game platforms if they need to. So now we're going to move on to the next part of this example, and we're going to look at the ticket office. Now again, like we did with the last 2 examples, we're going to be looking at the hardware that's going to be needed for these individuals. As this is a ticket office, they're not going to be doing too much more than scanning in tickets that might have been purchased online and people coming to gain entry, or it could be that people are turning up on the door to look to buy tickets. So we need to make sure that the people in these areas have the hardware and software that they need. So if we look here, we can see that we've provided an Intel i3 computer. Because of the very nature of the job that these people are likely to be doing, we're suggesting that they don't need a high-end PC. We're going to suggest a sort of a low-level amount of RAM for them, a reasonable size hard drive because they might have some local storage on there, a 21-inch monitor, and a standard mouse and keyboard. You can see here we've got an image that shows peripheral devices coming off, such as the card reader for any transactional information, but also the scanner so that they can beep barcodes as people come in with their tickets. Software that might be found on these machines could be things like Windows operating system, Windows 11 again making sure that we've got an antivirus protection software on there for them. And we're also going to be looking at having some sort of EPOS system. Now, you could use something like EPOS Now as a bespoke system, and it's available via purchase over the internet. Or you could find that there are other custom build ones out there. Obviously, they come at a different cost to the user. This is something, again, that you might want to put inside of your justifications inside of task 4 or 5. We're going to need to have some sort of office suite just in case that they need to use messaging, something like Teams, to be able to communicate with the head office if there's an issue around one of the tickets that have been sold, or a ticket issue of some description. There may be the need for some specialist merchant software to be installed from the bank that you're dealing with in terms of your transactions. And then you're going to have that connected to your switch. Again, we're going to use a very fast switch here so that we get some great communication speeds going through from device to device. We're using a wireless printer, or we could even use a wired network printer here via the switch, and that will allow us to print tickets out for anybody that's coming in that hasn't bought a ticket online. We're going to send this information, or we're going to have connection through a firewall into a router, and then because we're using things like financial transactions and we're communicating with a head office, we're going to use a VPN here to allow us some sort of encryption over our data transfer out over the internet. So this is something that you need to make sure that when you're doing submission for your exam, that is included inside of your work. As you can see here, we've zoomed out and we've got those entities linked all together. This is something that you're going to need to make sure that you're doing if you do have external areas linked together, showing how they do connect together. Next, we move on to this area where we're looking at the information and the data requirements from the individuals inside the organizations. So as we've broken down the devices inside of our network diagram, there are people that are going to be operating within those areas. So you can see here we have the owner executive, the ticket sales, the video operator, event manager, network engineer, and director. These people will have different information and data requirements. Now, it's worthwhile making a note on the difference between data and information. Data is unprocessed raw data. So it could be things like tickets that have been sold. It could be something like player rosters. Now, when we look at processing that data, it becomes information because it's informing us. So, for example, if I had a number of information pieces of data that talk about sales, as an executive, I can turn that information into information that informs me of the number of sales I've had, and then I can work out my turnover and whether I have profit or loss. So if we go through this diagram here, for this scenario, you can see that there's data coming into the owner executive that's going to allow them to have an idea of when the competitions are happening based on the data of event timings. This is gained from access to the event manager, who's going to be making the event happen and maybe will be creating the schedules for when things are going to happen. They're going to need to know how many tickets are available, and they will get that information through from the executive. But also they need to know who's sold what tickets. So if we look at the ticket salespeople, they're going to have an understanding of capacity, and they can relay information and data back and forwards between them and the event manager. The event manager is going to have information about the staff that are employed for the events, and they will relay that to people like the director, who's in charge of the video operator, who might be streaming an event or a competition that's happening. So these people are going to need to know things like event timings so that the video operator can be in the right location for any competition that's going to be happening. And then finally, we have the network engineer. The network engineer themselves will be in charge of or look after the hardware and software within the organization itself. They're going to need to know anything about updates that might be released. They're going to need to know data about any logins if there's needed for any of the games or even of the users to go onto some of the systems. And they're going to need to know the event times, because if they're doing any patches or updates or any downloads, they don't want to be taking any bandwidth away, or they don't want to be playing around with the system mid-game so that the game then crashes. So this is the diagram that you're going to need to produce, as well as your network diagram as shown previously. Further from this diagram, you should also look at breaking down with a bit more detail what's going on. So if you, for example, have information about the video operator and we just say competition for information, expand on that. So the video operator is going to need to know the data about the event timings and when they're going to happen and the locations of where these are going to be, so that when they do their videoing, that they know that they're in the right location so that they can then video those competitions. This is data and information that you're going to need to make sure is clear inside of your work. So as you can see from this question, task 3, it's quite a diagrammatic example that I'm showing you here, but what you're looking to achieve is showing how you want your systems or your IT solution to be presented or used or created for the organization that you've been given as a scenario.